Setting up the meeting now. Alrighty, we're live on YouTube.
All right. Good morning, Garfield. Good morning, Harding. This is our annual author event from the summer reading selection, and we have Mr. Dan Gemeinhart here, and he lives in Washington State, so it is even earlier for him. And he's written 5 books, one of which you read over the summer. And he's going to tell you a little bit about himself, the writing process. And then at the end, Mr. Costello is going to ask some of those questions you submitted. So without further ado, over to Dan.
All right. Well, good morning, guys. I'm super excited to be kind of talking with you today. And hope you're all tuning in. And like you said, I'm over here in Washington State, so we're on Pacific time, so it's 7 in the morning, not that early. And I'm excited to be able to talk with you. Obviously, this is not how we planned this. This has been a crazy year, right? 2020 has been crazy. And I wish that we could be there in person. I wish that I could be there in person. But this is a great next best option, and it's a good break from our routine, right? I know you guys are Zooming all the time and doing all this remote learning. We are here too. I've got 3 daughters who are school age and a wife who's a teacher, so we're doing all the Zooms. And it's anything that can break up the routine a little bit is a good thing. And so I'm excited to be doing this. Where I live right now, I don't know if you've watched the news, we've got all the fires, and so it's super smoky. In fact, it's hazardous. We're not supposed to open the doors or go outside. And so this is like a perfect thing for me to be doing because I can't go out there where it's hazardous. But here we go. So I'm going to be doing talking, obviously, and doing a presentation. But once I pop into the presentation, don't worry, I'm not going to be in the presentation like the share screen the whole time, which would be really boring just to have like the screen and hear my voice. There's some slides, that I'm on for kind of a while because I'm talking about whatever, and I'll bounce back to me. So it's going to be back and forth between the presentation and me. So don't let your hearts sink with like, oh, we're gonna be watching this presentation the whole time. You'll be also stuck sometimes watching me. Okay, so here I go. I'm going to share the screen. Well, and get to my presentation. Oh, there it is. Okay. And okay, and there we can skip that one. My name is Dan. We did that. Okay, so I get to call myself a lot of things. I've got a lot of different roles in my life, just like all of us do. I am a dad. This is just so you kind of know a little bit about me as a person. I am a dad, and let me close that up. There we go. I've got 3 awesome daughters, like I said. My oldest is in 9th grade. This picture is a few years old. My oldest is in 9th grade. My middle child is in 5th grade, and my youngest is in 2nd grade. So that's actually kind of a very old picture. Oops. I am a husband. You can see my wife there. She's great. She's a high school teacher. This is where we live, Washington State. And we don't live in the big city like Seattle by the ocean. We live in a little town up in the mountains. So this is like by where we live. It's a pretty place. Lots of mountains, lots of rivers, lots of forests that are on fire. It's a pretty place. She's an awesome lady. I am the owner of the best dog in the whole wide world. That is Odie. He is the best dog in the world. He's also the worst dog in the world. If you've ever had a big, huge, giant dog who's always knocking things down and making messes, you know what I mean. He's awful, but he's awesome. That's Odie. And I was a teacher for 13 years, up until a couple years ago, really. I was a full-time teacher, an elementary teacher, and I really loved it, and I really miss it. And if all I ever was a dad and a husband and a teacher, I would have been completely happy. And I was completely happy because those are 3 really fun, awesome things to be. But 5 years ago, in 2015, my life got a little extra exciting because in that year, my first book got published, The Honest Truth. And so when that book got published, I could still call myself a dad and a husband and a teacher, but I could also call myself something else, an author. And that is a dream I'd had for as long as I can remember. That's a dream I'd had since I was like a kindergartner. And for a long time in my life, it felt like a dream that wasn't ever going to come true. And I'll tell you about that. But then it did come true. And it's been a really fun, exciting adventure since then. And I'm really excited to be here with you guys, or kind of with you guys, to tell you about that stuff and more. But a little more about me, going further back, before the wife, before the kids, before the books. And a lot of people don't believe me when I share this, but I promise it's true. Once upon a time, believe it or not, I was born a baby. It's true. There's the photo proof. And I know it's hard to believe because I look nothing like a baby today, but I promise, totally started out as a baby, total baby. But I soon became completely adorable. Oh, look at that. And if you're wondering, why is this guy here sharing baby pictures of himself? Super fair question. I did not plan on putting a baby picture of myself in this presentation. Why would I do that? I was going to show pictures of myself like in middle school. I thought that would be fun. But then going through old albums to find those pictures, I came across this picture and I said, man, I was cute. Like, that's the best picture of me in my whole life. It's been nothing but downhill since then. And when you find your very best picture, you kind of want to show it off. So for no other reason, there I am, looking as good as I was ever going to look. When I was a kid, though, my family moved around a lot. We moved like every year, sometimes more than once a year. At first, because my dad was in the Army, so that's back to me, hopefully. And, you know, when you're in the Army, that's kind of, that happens a lot. So we moved around, but we moved every year, sometimes more than once a year. So I went to like 7 different elementary schools. We were always packing our stuff up into boxes and putting them in a truck and heading off to a new state, a new town, a new house, a new school. So I spent my whole childhood always being the new kid in class, the new kid in school. Some of you guys maybe have been there. Maybe your family's moved before and you've been the new kid in school. And if so, you know that that can be great. It can be a fun adventure. It can be a chance to see new places, meet new people, make new friends, all good things. But of course, it can also be kind of sad because you have to say goodbye to your old friends and leave them behind. And it can be kind of scary to, you know, walk into big new schools and you don't even know your way around. It can be lonely to walk into a class where everybody already knows everybody else and you don't have any friends there yet. So I spent a lot of my childhood sometimes feeling kind of sad and lonely and scared. But the silver lining to that, what I got out of that, is I got my love of books and my love of reading. It's a love I still have today. It's why I became a teacher and then why I became an author. Because what I figured out as a kid moving around all the time is that every time I walked into a new school on my first day, which was kind of all the time, everything in that new school was going to be different. It just was. Different hallways, different teachers, different kids. But every school that I went to had a library, and the libraries were all pretty much the same. And the books that were in those libraries were pretty much the same. And so I could walk into a new school on my first day and I could walk into that library and look at all those spines of the books on the shelves. And I could find these books that I'd already read before, stories that I loved, stories that I wanted to read again. And to me, as a new kid moving around, those old books that I loved felt like old friends. And when you're a new kid feeling kind of sad and lonely and scared, an old friend is an awesome thing to find. So the library was always my favorite room in every school, and still is, because it felt like a home. It was the one consistent thing in my life. Everything else in my life was always changing. Teachers and homes and towns and friends. But wherever I went, books were always there, and books were always there for me. So they were hugely important. Like in 5th grade, my family moved in the middle of the school year. We moved in December, which is kind of rough, right? If you're going to move, you want to at least like finish the school year and then start the new year at the new school. But we moved in December, hundreds of miles away. And I didn't want to move. I loved the school that I was in. I loved my teacher. I had awesome friends, didn't want to go. But as you guys know, a lot of times as a kid, you don't get to make the choices. The choices get made for you by the grown-ups. And so whether I liked it or not, I didn't. We packed up our stuff and off we moved hundreds of miles away. What made it even worse is that teacher that I loved so much in my old school, she was doing a read aloud. She was reading a book out loud to the class. And it's a book that some of you probably have read because it's still like a famous, popular book out there. It's called Hatchet by Gary Paulson. awesome adventure. This kid gets in this plane crash out in the woods. He has to survive all by himself with just a hatchet, a little axe. It's awesome, great adventure. I was super into it. My friends were super into it. And then right in the middle, my family moved. So I didn't get to finish that story with my class. Bummer. First day at my new school was not a great day. It was a perfectly fine school, but I just didn't want to be there. I was homesick. I missed my old school. I missed my old teacher. I missed my old friends. Didn't want to be at this new place. So first chance I got, I went down to my favorite room in every school, the library. And I asked my new library teacher, do you have this book called Hatchet by Gary Paulson? And she said, of course we do, because every school everywhere has Hatchet. And so I was able to check that book out and pick up reading it where we'd left off and jump back into that story that me and my old friends were enjoying so much. And so that having that book in my hand and being back in that story made me feel less homesick, less sad, lonely, scared. It connected me back to my friends and my teacher that I miss so much. And so that gives you a feel for how much books meant to me, a lot, and also why they meant that much to me. Books to me were not just something I did when I was bored. Books weren't just something I did for fun, although it was and still is, but it was more than that. Books to me were like my home because my real life home was always changing. And books to me were like friends, which sounds super sad, but it wasn't, because my real life friends I kept having to move away from and say goodbye to, but wherever I went, books were always there. And so it makes sense then that became my dream, or one of my dreams. I said, wow, books are so awesome and important in my life and powerful. Wouldn't it be cool to write my own someday? Wouldn't it be awesome to be an author? Wouldn't it be an amazing feeling to see a book that I wrote sitting there on a library shelf with all my old friends, the books that I loved so much? And so that became my dream. And I started young. So this picture is, I think, from about second grade, based on the height of my socks. I think that's about a second grade picture. And I picked a second grade picture because I was in the second grade when I wrote the first story that I still remember today. Now, I'll tell you about that story, but warning, it's pretty scary and pretty disturbing. And I'm not joking. It's actually pretty disturbing. Not quite as disturbing as how short those shorts are, but close, right up there. So back to me. So it was a school project, right? Everyone had to write a story. Awesome, right up my alley. And it was October, which of course means Halloween, especially when you're in second grade, right? And so even though it wasn't the assignment, I was inspired by all the decorations and the themes. So I said, okay, I'm going to write the scariest, spookiest story that I can imagine. And I did. I wrote a story in the second grade about a boy and a girl, like high schoolers, teenagers, who went alone into a graveyard at midnight on Halloween. Not a good idea, especially if you're in a story, you know something terrible is going to happen to you. And sure enough, in the story that I wrote, this horrible ghost witch thing popped up from behind a tombstone, and she shrieked, and it melted their faces off their bodies. And when the police found them in the morning, all they found were their eyeballs sitting on a tombstone. And there was a lot of blood and screaming. And it was awesome. I was so proud of this story. I had blown my own mind. It seemed to me like something a grown-up would write. I was very impressed with myself. And I turned it in with so much pride. I'm sure that my teacher had some questions from my parents, like, what's wrong with this kid? But I was very impressed with myself. And I made a cover for it with like a title and my name and a picture of eyeballs on a tombstone. And I wrote on the cover, this story is super scary. It should not be read by anyone under the age of 35, just because I knew the power of my words. So I'm now old enough to read that story. You guys are not, shouldn't even have told you about it, my bad. But that was the start of my writing career, so to speak. That story is still sadly unpublished, unavailable commercially, but there you go. This is a real joy for me to share. Here's me in seventh grade. This was during my awkward phase, which lasted from about fifth grade until the present day. You can see I was Harry Potter before Harry Potter was Harry Potter. So I was well ahead of trend. And you can also see that I was technically on the track team. You can see my little hoodie there, Desert Hills track. Not a stellar track career for me. Didn't win any ribbons because I couldn't run fast, which I learned is actually a really important part about being on the track team. It's kind of the main idea. So no ribbons for me, but there I am. I got the picture, so totally worth it. And I always said I wanted to be a writer. And you can see the word I underlined there, said, because all through middle school, all through high school, all through college, even for years after college, that's always what I'd say is when I was talking with friends or doing those what I want to be when I grow up activities, I would always say, I love books, I love writing, I'm a writer, I'm going to be a writer. That's an awesome thing to say. That's a great dream to have. Some of you might have that same dream, and that's fantastic. The problem is for all those years, that's kind of all I was doing. I talked about being a writer, and I thought about being a writer, and I dreamed about being a writer, but I didn't hardly ever do any actual writing. I would like write a poem every now and then, or I would start a story and stop after a couple of pages. I really loved the idea of being a writer. I didn't love the idea of doing all the work it takes to become a writer. And of course it takes work. Any dream that you have takes work. If I would have wanted to become a professional basketball player, because I love basketball, but if I never wanted to go to practice, didn't want to work on my dribbling, never wanted to work on my jump shot, is that basketball dream ever going to come true? No, of course not. We all know that, not ever, because dreams don't come true just by themselves. Dreams only come true if you decide to make them come true. And for way too long, I didn't. And then one day I realized that I was like a grown-up, basically. I was out of college. I had a job and a family. And one night I was in my 20s. I had to saying the same old thing, talking with friends. I love books. I'm a writer. I'm going to be a writer. And then I realized, man, I've been saying this for like almost 20 years. I've been spitting a big game, calling myself a writer, but I was all talk, no action. And what I realized that day is that for all those years, I'd had a writing dream, but not a writing goal. And I always thought that those two words meant the same thing. Dreams and goals, dreams and goals. It's just something that you want, right? But no, there's a big difference between a dream and a goal. A dream is, yes, indeed, back and forth. A dream, yes, a dream is something that you want. And that's awesome. I hope we all have dreams. I'm very pro dream. Yay, dreams. But if all you do is spend all your time just dreaming forever, then you're asleep, basically, right? If you don't wake up and make that dream into a goal, it is never going to come true just by itself. And a goal is just something you work toward. Not a big difference on your screen right now. It's two words. But in real life, that's all the difference in the world. My writing dream was never, ever going to come true, and it didn't. When I was 25 years old, I was 0% closer to that dream coming true than I was back in kindergarten because I hadn't done anything except dream about it. But once I realized that, once I flipped that switch and made it from a dream to a goal, then I could start taking steps and taking actions and learning stuff and doing work to try to make this dream in my heart be a real thing in my life. And so that's what I decided to do. I said, okay, self, no more talking, thinking, dreaming. Enough of that. You've been doing that for a couple of decades. And it's time to either give up, which I didn't want to do, and say, well, I guess I'm not going to be a writer. Didn't want to do that. Or it's time to roll up your sleeves and get to work and see if you can make this dream come true. And so that's what I decided to do. I said, no more talking, thinking, dreaming. It's time to start working. Now, the work I did was different stuff. I took some classes. I went to some workshops, which are super helpful. I read some books about how to write books, which sounds weird, but it's also super helpful. But most importantly, of course, is I started writing, and I started writing books. Now, if you look online or a bookstore, whatever, the honest truth, this is my first book. This is the Dan Gemeinhardt's debut novel. But this is not the first book that I wrote. Like every other writer I've ever talked to, I wrote several other books before my first book that got published. Books that you can't find anywhere because they never got published by a book company because they weren't good enough. And normally when I'm doing my in-person presentation, I have people guess, and I've got like, prizes. Can't really do that, but you can just make a guess up in your head. How many books do you think I wrote before my first book that got published? And I don't mean ideas that I had or stories that I started. That's like a million. But I mean, I wrote the whole book, start to finish, hundreds of pages, novels, years of my life. And then those books crashed and burned, went nowhere. So think in your mind, okay, how many books, how many tries did it take him? Think. And then I'll just tell you that it's not one book that crashed and burned. It's not two books. It's not three books. It's not four books. It's 5. I wrote 5 other entire whole books that never got published because they weren't good enough. And those first 5 books that I wrote were terrible. Here's my graphic representation of my first 5 books. And that is not ice cream. No. But you know what? It makes sense, right? Because writing a book is kind of hard. And I had not been doing the work or the practice. Anytime any one of us tries something hard or starts something new, we're probably not as good as we want to be when we start. The first time every one of us played baseball, we're like 4 years old and we toddled up to the plate. Not a single one of us hit a home run or anything close to it. We probably didn't hit the ball at all. We probably had a ton of strikes before we ever hit the ball. But we didn't throw the bat down after one swing and walk away and never try again, right? We kept at it, kept swinging till we figured it out, got better, and finally started hitting the ball. Same with me in writing, same with all of us in most things, whether it's school stuff or sports or music or whatever. All of us in life sometimes have to try something and kind of fail, be terrible, and try again and fail again, and try again and fail again, and keep trying and working until we get better and get as good as we want to be. Same with me in writing. So when I look at these 5 books now, which again are not real books, they're just files on my computer, even though I can see how terrible they are, they're just like the worst books you've ever read, I don't feel embarrassed by those 5 books. I'm not ashamed of them. They were not a waste of my time, just the opposite. I'm just as proud of those 5 books as I am of my books that actually got published, because I know that I worked really hard on those 5 terrible books, which means I learned a ton and grew a lot. And every one of those failures taught me something that I needed to learn to become a better author. And I couldn't have become the author I wanted to be. I couldn't have written The Honest Truth or Scar Island or Coyote Sunrise if I hadn't written those first books first. So me writing those awful books that never got published, that no one's ever going to read, that was not me failing. That was me working. That was me going to basketball practice, me doing what I had to do to get where I wanted to get. And even though it's not shown in those beautiful emojis, every one of those books was better than the one before. That second one was way better than the first one. The fourth one was better than the second one. The fifth one was way better than the first one. So I was getting better. I was getting closer. And those are just the steps I had to go through. Those are the stepping stones I had to jump across. So that's what life is like sometimes. You fail and you try and you fail again and you try again until you get there. Oh, there it's us. This is my another graphic representation. So me learning to write books was like a raccoon learning to ride a bike, okay? Wasn't super smooth, wasn't natural, not great at first, clumsy, but just like him or her, it's hard to tell, I kept at it, didn't give up, stayed on the bike, figured it out. Even the disasters taught me things that I needed to learn. Like this kid is like me learning to write books. Here I go, I'm gonna write a book, it's gonna be great, and then, oh, epic fail, try again. Write another book, Dan, this time it'll be awesome, this time you'll succeed. No, I was just like that kid. Now, I don't know where that kid is. He's a perfect metaphor, that poor kid. I don't know where that kid is today. I hope he's okay. But I bet wherever he is, I bet he's like a great bike rider. I bet he almost never runs into poles. So in his bike riding career, that was not a great day. Discouraging, frustrating, painful. But I bet he picked himself up and shook himself off and said, man, I don't want to do that again. And that made him a better bike rider, right? That's a lesson he learned so he could do better the next time, the next day. And so that's what I kept doing. I kept hitting the poles and I kept getting back up. And that's what we all got to do. We're all going to hit those poles in life. And every one of us has to have that grit, that determination to pick ourselves up and say, man, that's not how I wanted that to turn out, but I got this. I learned something. I can give it another try. I can do better and get closer next time. Back to this. Forget, oh, one last time. Then I found out that writing was just the beginning. I thought that writing the book was the big thing. Wow, I sat here and I wrote 300 pages. I wrote the end. Woohoo! Now I just get it published. Yay, my dream came true. And it turns out it's the other way around, that writing the book is almost the easy part, even though it's not easy. Because then I started trying to get my books published. And what I found out is that there are kind of a lot of people that want to be authors. But there are only really a few companies that publish books, and they only publish a few new books each year. And almost all of the books they publish are by people who are already famous authors, right? They publish the next Rick Riordan book. They publish the next Divergent book. They don't publish a bunch of books by some guy living in Washington State who's never published a book before. It's one of those things like becoming an actor, becoming a musician. It's really hard to break into to get your shot. And I learned that because as I finished those first 5 books, I did not know that they were terrible. When I wrote them, I thought they were amazing. I was sure they were going to make my dream come true. And so I started sending them off to agents, which is like someone who tries to help you get a book published, and to publishers, saying, hey, I wrote this book. Do you want to publish it? Back to here. Boop. I'm pretty smooth at this. To agents, publishers. And so there I am saying, hey, I want to publish my book. And you can guess what they said, because I've basically told you, is over and over and over, those nice folks and otherwise told me no. I sent my books out and they said no, over and over and over again. And in publishing, just like in basketball, that is called a rejection. So every time you send a book to somebody and say, hey, what do you think? And they write back and say, nope, it's not good enough. We don't want it. That's called a rejection. I spent years and years getting lots and lots of rejections for those books before I ever got a yes. This is my second guessing game. Again, normally I would have you raise your hands and I'd throw you a Snickers or something. But guess in your mind, how many times do you think I got a no? How many rejections, how many crashes and burns before I finally got that yes and got my dream to come true? You can get the number in your head. I'll take a sip of coffee. And I will tell you that I got 99 rejections, 99 no's before I ever got a yes. And I promise I'm not just making that up because it's kind of a fun, dramatic number because it's almost 100. It's a palindrome. No, like that is legitimately real. I didn't count as I went. That would have been depressing. But once I finally got my yes, I went back because I kept a list, right? So I didn't send the same book to the same person. So I kept track. And once I finally got my yes, I said, man, that really felt like a lot of no's. And so I went back to my spreadsheet and I counted, no lie, 99 rejections. It was not until my 100th try, exactly, for reals, that I finally got a yes. That's a lot of no's, a lot of failures, a lot of times getting shot down. Just to give you a visual of what that looks like, this is what 99 no's looks like. Now on the screen, it's no big deal. Okay, it's a bunch of no's, we get it. But remember, in real life, each and every single one of those no's was me picking out an agent or a publisher and writing my letter and sending it off and crossing my fingers and holding my breath and waiting, wishing, hoping, praying, dreaming, running out to my mailbox, seeing an envelope back from New York City, tearing it open and seeing no. And that whole sad story happened that many times. It was a lot of failure, a lot of bad mail. I hated my mailman during these years. Another way to show it visually, I like visuals. I got a no for every puppy in this picture. And if you're thinking, he's wrong, there is 101 Dalmatians. It's right there in the title, man. You're right, but just FYI, because I get that a lot, 101 Dalmatians counts the mom and dad dog. There are 99 puppies. It adds up to 101. Mom and dad dog aren't in that picture. So it's legit. I got a note for every puppy in that picture. And the rejections were not as cute as the puppies.
Dan, I have a quick question then just about that.
Yeah.
That, of course, accepting the rejections was not fun, but could you see at the time, or maybe looking back, why those rejections, why you received those rejections? In other words, why those things were not up to snuff, I guess you could say, or like, publishing level?
No, you don't get feedback because the folks who are saying no are super busy. So they just send you a form letter that says no, basically. So you don't get actual feedback. And sometimes I didn't like, what? I feel like this book is really strong. But there's definitely like no bad blood from me or bitterness because, I mean, I look at them now and I can see no. Like those rejections were really important to me because they made me work harder. And if I would have gotten some quick, easy yes or something, then I wouldn't have had to push myself to get better and better and better. And so at the time, a lot of times, no. I was like, oh man, I thought that was going to be the one. But as I learned, as I grew more, and I had to keep an open mind, when you get a negative feedback, it's easy to get defensive and say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. They're missing out on a great book. But if you slow your roll a little bit and open your ears, and I would go to these, workshops where you can have someone look at it, and I would listen to all the feedback. I would share with my friends and family. I was in a writing group, and so they could give me feedback. And you've got to listen with open ears. Not everybody's always right, but you've got to be willing to hear the negative thing and say, okay, I want to hear critique. I want to hear the criticism because that's the only way I can make it better. That's the only way I can get better. Like in sports, the coaches say, no, you're doing it wrong. You got to do it this way. They're not being mean. They're helping you get better, right? And so, yeah, what kept me from giving up was seeing that I was getting closer. Like, oh, I guess this third book still isn't good enough, but man, I can see what they were talking about with that first book and the second book. I can see how much better this is. So if I keep going, my fourth book's going to be even better. So yeah, so you got to be able to listen to feedback, and you got to have an open mind. And I mean, sometimes it's frustrating, like what? But you got to keep going for sure.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and feel free to pop in like that anytime, because I know that all you guys out there watching, like, oh man, sitting there watching your screen, it's good to mix it up a little bit. So yeah, I got those no's. There they are again. A lot of times it felt like this. This is like me working hard, gonna make this dream come true. Not. Epic fail, rejected by the world. Try again, send another letter. This time they'll say yes. This time your dream will come true. Or not how gifts work. It's going to keep happening. And sometimes it felt like this. Here I go. Things are looking great. Oh, and then hitting the wall. Totally. Now, I don't just put those in my presentation to be mean, although it's because they're funny. But because just like that kid on the bike, they are perfect similes or metaphors of what I'm talking about. Because the girl doing gymnastics, she's working hard. You can't say she's not working hard. I was working hard. She's doing awesome at whatever that was. I was doing the best I could at writing, but just like her, I kept hitting that wall. But also just like her, I kept having to pick myself up and try again. It's not shown in that clip, but all of us would guess that's not the last time she did gymnastics. And so I had to keep picking myself up and say, what can I learn from this? How can I do better? And it wasn't, of course, it wasn't great. When those rejections came in, I wasn't like, sweet, one more chance to try again. No, it was super discouraging. But I'd say, okay, what can I learn? How can I make my fourth book better than my third book? I just got rejection number 87. That's a drag. What can I learn? How can I make my 88th try better than my 87th try? And that's what we all got to do when we have those failures. We got to pick ourselves up and see how we can move forward. Back here. But then finally, we knew it had a happy ending. Then finally, after 8 years of getting told no. So this wasn't like one bad summer. This was 8 years of getting told no and 10 years of writing, right? Because I wrote for a couple of years before I had anything to send out. So a decade of working and 5 really terrible books. And I'm not just being modest, they're awful. And 99 rejections. That's just a list of sad numbers. But finally, after all that, because I didn't give up, because I didn't quit, and because I kept at it, finally then I wrote that 6th book, The Honest Truth. And then I got a yes. And I got to see my dream come true, got to see my name on the cover of a book, got to be an author, got to be here talking with you guys today. And I'm really glad that this book, I have a handy, that this book is the dream that this is the book that made my dream come true, because this one's especially important and personal to me. And if you don't know what this book is about, The Honest Truth, this book is about a boy named Mark, who runs away with his dog named Bo to climb Mount Rainier. It's a big, famous mountain in Washington State. And it's a pretty sad, serious book, because the reason Mark, the boy, runs away is that Mark has been battling cancer. And he thought that the cancer was over, but he finds out that the cancer's come back. And before he goes back into the hospital for more treatments, he wants to fulfill this dream he's had of climbing Mount Rainier. And so he runs away with his dog to try to do that. And I wrote this book in honor of a friend of mine. He was my sister's fiance, so he was going to marry my sister. And like the main character in the book, his name was Mark. That's where I got that from. And like the main character, he loved mountain climbing, climb mountains all over the world, including Mount Rainier like 15 times. And unfortunately, like the main character, my friend got cancer. And he got an especially bad form of cancer. And he ended up passing away from the cancer, which of course was super sad because he was an awesome guy and a great friend. And so, of course, I was feeling sad about that. We all were. And I really wanted to do something in my friend's memory, in his honor. And that's where this book came from. Now, this book is not about my friend. He was a grown-up. This is about a 12-year-old. So it's all fiction. It's all made up. But I took those pieces from real life. I took his name, and I took the mountain climbing, and I took the cancer. And I tried to kind of weave them together into a story that I hope that he would have liked. And so this one really means a lot to me. And I'm glad that of all the books I've written before and since, that this is the one that got me to where I wanted to get, because it does mean so much to me. I'm starting to lose my voice. This smoke, I tell you, I get hoarse and scratchy by about 8 in the morning every day from this. It's terrible. Okay, but I've got water and coffee. I'll be fine. So here we go. So what I've learned on this whole journey of mine of failing and not not failing and succeeding and working and trying and getting shot down, is that I feel super lucky that these days I get to sit down and make up stories and write them down and sometimes see them get made into books. My favorite thing, super lucky. But really, what I've learned is the most important story that we get to tell to the world, not just me, but all of us, you and me, the most important story we get to tell is not any story that we write down with a pen or a pencil or a laptop. The most important story each one of us gets to tell to the world really is just how we live our lives and the kind of people that we choose to be and how we choose to treat the people in our lives and the people around us. Like every day we get up and we go through our day and we don't even think about it. We get up, well, these days, once upon a time, we get up and go to school and we live our lives. And every day without thinking about it, you make like 1,000 little decisions all day long, 1,000 choices about who you're going to be that day and how you're going to be and how you're going to treat people, how you're going to treat your family, your brothers, sisters, your friends, kids in class, kids in the hall, kids on the bus. And all those decisions you make all day long without even thinking about it, added up together, is like the story of your life. And that story matters way more than any book on a library or bookstore shelf. This is the lesson that I learned from that child that I told you about, moving around so much, because it gave me the chance to kind of see lots of different kinds of childhood. Because sometimes I got to a new school, got off to a great start, made awesome friends, had a terrific year or a few months at that school. Sometimes though, just the opposite. Got to a new school, didn't make any friends, got bullied, picked on, teased, had a lonely, miserable, awful year or a few months at that school. So I got to kind of see life from all sides. I knew what it felt like to be happy with lots of friends. It feels great. But I also knew what it felt like to be lonely and friendless and picked on. It feels terrible. And so this lesson means a lot to me. And when I think of this lesson, I especially think of my 7th grade year, because what I remember most about 7th grade, more than anything that happened in school, is a girl that rode the same bus as me. And the reason I remember her is because every day from the time this girl got on the bus at school until she got off at her house, every day this group of guys on the bus made fun of her. And every single day they picked on her and teased her. Every day they bullied her mercilessly for the whole ride home. And every day this girl would sit there in her seat on the bus and she would cry actual tears for the whole bus ride while they tormented her. Now, I was not one of the guys who was making fun of her, but I was sitting next to them and I was kind of friends with them. And every single day that year, I didn't tell them to stop. Every day that year, I didn't stick up for her. Every day that year, I didn't sit by her or show her some kindness, even though I could see how lonely and miserable and awful she felt. And that still really bothers and haunts me to this day. All decades later, I'm like a grown-up. I think about that girl from back in 7th grade all the time. And I think about the horrible year that she had and how I chose to just sit there and watch and let it happen. I think about the awful experiences she was having and everybody laughing, everyone making fun of her, and no one sticking up for her. I think about the kind of person that I chose to be that year and the kind of choices I made, the kind of story that I told the world about myself by sitting there and laughing along and not doing it, not doing anything to stop it. And it's easy for us to tell ourselves those things don't matter because unfortunately, I know we all see them. We see them on the bus or we see them in the hall, we see them in the cafeteria. We see someone being cruel to somebody else, or we just see someone who we can tell feels lonely and left out. It's always super easy for us to tell ourselves, not my business, not my problem. I'm in Seattle. It doesn't really matter. It's not that big of a deal. That's what we tell ourselves because that's easier. But I'm telling you, it really does matter. That if you can have the courage to reach out, speak up, make somebody else's life a little bit better, it will really matter to that person. It'll mean the world to them. And if you do it, you'll feel great. I can also tell you that if you don't do it, you will remember and you'll regret it decades later and wish that you'd done the right thing when you had the chance. And I know it's tough. I know how hard it is. Like we all know. I know exactly why I didn't stick up for that girl in 7th grade, because it's hard to put yourself out there like that and say, guys, knock it off, leave her alone. I knew that if I did, I could be the next target. Those guys might turn on me. I knew what it felt like to be the target. It's terrible. So I completely understand why in 7th grade I chose to do the easy thing instead of the right thing. But of course, I know that I should have done the right thing. And I really wish that I would have. Because yeah, maybe those guys would have turned on me. Maybe I would have had a rough couple of weeks in 7th grade. You know what? Tough. Oh, well, I would have lived. I'd still be here today. It would have been the right thing to do. It would have made a big difference to that girl to have someone on her side. And if I would have done that, then today I would have a 7th grade story and a 7th grade self that I was proud of and happy to share, instead of one that I'm ashamed of and sad to share. So when we have those chances, we all know we have those chances to be the kind of person we know we should be, to make the world the kind of place we want it to be, even if it's tough, even if it's scary, we've got to take those chances. Because once they're gone forever. And then you just got to live with it. There's no way for me to go back and fix what I did and didn't do in 7th grade. It's done. Story of my life, that chapter is done. I don't get to go back and revise it and fix it and make me be who I wish I would have been. It's over. And if that girl looks back on her 7th grade year, it's probably a horrible memory. If she remembers me, what kind of character am I in the story of that girl's life? Not a hero, basically a villain. And there's no way for me to fix that. In the story of that girl's life, that is the character that Dan Gemeinhart will always be forever. That's a terrible feeling. Don't do that to yourself. Be the kind of person today, tomorrow, next year that you'll be proud of in 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. You need to be your own hero. And for that year, I was not. And I was not a hero in the life of that girl either, even though I could have been and should have been. What else I've learned is that it ain't about talent. Whatever it is, whatever you hope to accomplish, your hopes, your dreams, whether it's this year, next year, your whole life, we always talk about talent. Oh, that person's so talented. Oh, they're so good at that. Oh, they're so smart, whatever. And I barely believe in talent, or I think that talent matters just a tiny bit as far as how much success you're going to have in your life. Because from what I've seen in my own life and friends and family over and over again, is it's not about who's the most talented. It's really not, as far as who gets that success. It's really about who works hard. And it's about who is the most determined. And most especially of all, it's really just about who doesn't give up. Because that's the only reason, oh, kind of frozen. That's the only reason I got to see my dream come true. Not because I was talented. No, when I started, zero talent. Those first 5 books, train wrecks. But here I am, I got to see my dream come true because I worked really hard for a long time. And I was determined to get better when I wasn't as good as I wanted to be. And even though life gave me all those chances to give up, 99 chances, I didn't take them. I kept working, kept trying to get closer. That's the only reason my dream came true. Not because I was good at writing, not at all, but just because I worked hard and was determined and didn't give up. And that's the kind of grit we all have to have. Like, there's a famous story about Michael Jordan. And if you don't know who Michael Jordan is, that's sad. But he is one of, I'll definitely say one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Is he? I mean, LeBron's amazing, right? I got nothing against LeBron, Kobe, those guys. But Michael Jordan, amazing. Like, what, 6 championships, 7 MVPs, international all-star, right? Like Nike Air and Air Jordans, we still buy his clothes and wear his shoes. Amazing, right? When Michael Jordan, the greatest ever, tried out for his high school basketball team, he didn't make it. He got cut. His coach said he wasn't good enough. Michael Jordan obviously didn't give up, didn't say, well, I guess basketball is not going to work out for me. Even though he didn't make the varsity team that year, he spent twice as much time in the gym, twice as much time working on his basketball. And the next year, tried out for the team again, made it, became a star, went on to college, became a star, went on to the pros, became the greatest player ever. Even Michael Jordan, when he started, wasn't talented enough, didn't even have enough talent to make a high school team. There were 12 guys at that high school with more basketball talent than Michael Jordan. He became the greatest ever because nobody worked harder than him, and he was crazy determined. And when life gave him that chance to give up, he didn't take it. He said, no way. He used it as fuel to make himself work harder, get better, and give it another shot. And that's what we all got to do. We're all going to fail sometimes. Every one of us, all of you and me, we're all going to fail in our future. It's a part of everybody's life, like it or not, mostly not. We'll have small failures. We'll have medium failures. We'll have large failures. It could be a team you don't make. It could be a test you don't pass. It could be a school you don't get into. It could be a book that doesn't get published. It could be a personal failure, like not sticking up for a girl on the bus when you know you should. There's lots of ways we can fail, lots of ways we will fail. But those failures don't matter as much as they feel, because when they happen, they feel terrible. And Michael Jordan got cut from that team. It was probably the worst day of his life. But Michael Jordan is not defined by not making that team in high school. He's defined by everything he did next. You're only defined by your failures if you let yourself be. If you try something and fail and quit, yeah, you're kind of a failure at that. But if you try something and fail and keep trying and working and getting better, you're not failing, you're working. And so that's what we all gotta have, that grit to keep picking ourselves up. Okay. That's one of my big things. I'm gonna skip that part actually. Okay, and actually, sometimes, depending on what the timing is like, I read a little chunk of the honest truth. I'm also going to skip that just because of time and whatnot. But I read a chapter and it's got pictures that go along with it. Oh, always look at that. Okay, so what's going on now with me? We're almost to the questions. If you're ready for that, ready to listen to me stop talking, is I wrote some other books, and I'll just real quick, I'll do this in like a couple minutes. My second book, Some Kind of Courage, came out in 2016. This one is like historical fiction. It's like a pioneer days, settlers out here in the West, people coming in covered wagons kind of thing. And the main character, Joseph, he is a pioneer kid. He's also an orphan. The rest of his family died on the journey west, which is a drag for him. And all that he has left of himself, his life, his family is his horse, Sarah, and he loves her more than anything. And chapter 1 starts off, he's living with this mean old man who's supposed to be taking care of him. And he comes back to their cabin one day and finds out that while he was gone, that guy sold Sarah, sold his horse to this cruel horse trader who was passing through. And this is the last piece of his family. And so Joseph runs away, sets off on this adventure across the frontier to track that guy down and get his horse back. And so it's like a Western adventure. There are, outlaws and grizzly bears and stuff, but there's also some emotional stuff, right? About grief and finding out where you fit in the world. That's Some Kind of Courage. And then my third book, Scar Island, came out in 2017. And I know some of you have read this one. Real quick, I'm losing my voice. And this one's about a kid who gets sent to this horrible place called Slabhenge, which is this half prison, half reform school for kids who have committed terrible crimes. And then catastrophe strikes there at Slabhenge, and the kids on the island find themselves alone, no more grown-ups. And so they have to survive the island, they have to survive each other. Jonathan's dealing with his grief and his guilt over what he did to get sent there. So it's a little bit about him dealing with the stuff, but it's a lot about friendship and adventure and survival. That is Scar Island.
Good, and before you move off of, before you move off of Scar Island, that sets us up for one of the questions that Riley Stahlbaum here at Harding had was, are you going to make a sequel to Scar Island to finish it off?
Nice, a great question, and it's perfect timing. So, okay, I want to talk about this without giving anything away in case anyone wants to read it but hasn't read it yet. So the short answer is no, I don't have any plans for a Scar Island sequel for various reasons. I'm not sure where the story would go. And again, I don't want to talk about the ending too much, but I think the way that it ends, I don't know what direction that would leave us for a sequel to go. And I will say, okay, without giving anything away, that I've gotten that question a lot, and I want to rewrite that ending. I feel like I didn't get it right because I get a lot of questions from kids saying, that ending is a cliffhanger. Like you don't know what's going to happen next. It's a cliffhanger. And I think I blew it because in my, I cannot give things away. In my mind, it's not a cliffhanger. No, I can't talk about it. In my mind, the crisis is over. What's gonna happen has happened. And then it's just a matter of wrapping it up. I used to have one more chapter in that book. My rough draft had one more chapter, but it was like boring. It was like them packing up and stuff. Like this is the readers don't need to see this. Once the adventure is over, the story should end. But as a result, since I just cut that chapter off, I get kids saying, how could you end it like that? It's right in the middle of the story. And in my mind, the story was not. The story was over. So I don't have any plans for a sequel.
My opinion is that you got it right, because I think that it needs to go on in the mind of the reader after the fact. And I think that, that's what we want young readers to do sometimes too. So I think you got it right.
Oh, awesome. Good. Thank you. And yeah, so not all, without giving too much away, not all the characters make it to the end. Some characters die, but at the end, that last chapter, the ones who are there are going to be fine. And I guess I can say that without giving too much away, because that's the case of every story. The ones who live to the end are still alive, but the crisis is over. Yeah, so thanks for the question. I have thought about some kind of a prequel because Slabhenge has a long history that's kind of talked about in the book. And there could be books and books and books of things that happened there to previous people, or even like the character of the librarian, what was his childhood like, because he was like born there, right, without giving too much away. And so I thought there could be room for a prequel, but as far as those characters, I'm not sure what else would happen next, especially with the state of the island once the book ends. I think that story's pretty much done. But
I would read a prequel.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so that was Scar Island. Awesome. And my fourth book, Good Dog, came out in 2018. And this one is about a dog named Brody who is a good dog, obviously, but he's also a dead dog. But it's not as sad as it sounds, believe it or not, because when the story starts, he's already dead, which makes it less sad. It's not one of those books that you read and the dog dies at the end and it ruins your weekend. He's already dead. He's like in dog heaven. You don't have to watch him die. So that makes it a way less sad, believe it or not. But then Brody realizes he's like up in dog heaven. It's a happy beginning. He realizes that the boy that he loves back here on Earth is in danger, and he's not okay with that. And so he figures out how he can come back as a ghost, basically, to try to save his boy. And so it's adventure, this ghost dog coming back to Earth to try to find his boy and save his boy, because he's such a good dog. That's Good Dog. And then my newest book, The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise, last year, 2000. No, it came. Yes, it was. God, sorry. I get a little smoke haze. Yes, it did come out last year. That's true. And this one I will talk a little bit about. This one is about a girl named Coyote Sunrise, hence the title, and she lives a very unusual life. Her and her dad live in this old school bus. That's like their home. They converted it to a camper. They drive around the country. They never spend more than one day in one place. She doesn't go to school, like none of us these days. And so she lives this very unusual life. We find out her life wasn't always like that. 5 years ago, she lived in a house with her dad and her mom and two sisters. But then her mom and her sisters were killed in a car accident. And her dad was too heartbroken and messed up to keep living in town and going to work. And so they sold their house, bought the bus. They've been driving around ever since. They never go home. They never talk about the past. They even took new names. That's not her real name. They took new names to leave their old life and their old pain behind. But then at the beginning of the story, Coyote learns that something that really matters to her. It's a memory box that she made with her mom and her sisters before the accident. They buried it in a park together. That's about to get lost, destroyed forever, because they're tearing out the park back home. And this is the last piece she has of her mom and her sisters, and she can't imagine losing it. And so she has to race back across America from Florida to Washington State in 3 days in time to save this thing that means the world to her. And along the way, they pick up some other hitchhikers and travelers. And so it becomes this whole kind of troop of people on this adventure across America. So it's another journey adventure. All my stories are journey adventures. None of my stories happen like in the kids' home. They're all traveling stories. Scar Island isn't traveling, but it's not in the kids' home. So it's another emotional journey. I like emotional stories and I like adventure journeys. And so that's pretty much what I write, right? That you should write what you want to read. And so that is it for my prepared content. That's my last book. And we've got a few minutes for questions, and I'm happy to answer. I know that you guys sent questions ahead of time, and so we're gonna get through kind of as many of those as we have time for.
Right, yeah, actually that's a nice segue, talking about the remarkable journey of Coyote Sunrise, that I remember during the kickoff for summer reading, you mentioned about some interest in making that movie perhaps. And a lot of times students always ask, about making these books into movies. Are there any plans, or can you talk at all about that process? Because Coyote Sunrise was just such a visual book, the way that you wrote it, with a lot of memorable characters. I could see it being a movie. So anything on that process?
Yeah, so it's a fun question. And first of all, it's kind of interesting. Like the author has no control. Like there's nothing I can work to make into a movie, or even my publisher. It has to be a movie company that finds out about a book and thinks it would be a good movie, and then they buy the rights. They buy the rights to make it into a movie. They buy the rights to the story. So there's nothing I can do. The I guess kind of exciting news, and I think there's some things I'm not supposed to say, but I can talk around it, is a movie company did buy the rights to make a movie. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. They do that all the time, and they've got hundreds of millions of dollars. They buy little books all the time, and most of them never go anywhere, but you never know. But the company that bought it's a good, big company. They make good, big movies. They're really awesome. They seem really excited about it. I've talked with them. They already hired a director. They hired a screenwriter who's already done the script, and so it might get, and so there's a lot of hurdles that's already gotten past, because a lot of times don't even make it that far. And so maybe someday it'll be a movie. Again, still, I mean, like 2% of projects ever actually end up being made into a movie, but I've made it through the first couple steps. So maybe there'll be a Coyote Sunrise movie someday. It would be exciting, it'd be super fun. But it's nothing that I really try to think about, just because there's nothing I can do on it. It's out there, right now, somewhere in Hollywood, someone's kind of working on it. But we'll see what happens. It's a fun thought, though.
Would you be nervous about the direction that a director might take your work?
Not at all. Some writers get really funny about that, like, oh, I wrote it this way and it's got to be just like this. But I've got like no territorialness about it. Like I know that what makes a good book is not necessarily what makes a good movie. There's always differences. Things that work good on the page don't work good on the screen. They have to add stuff to make it longer or cut stuff to make it shorter. And I'm excited to see what some smart creative person does and what different direction they take it. I think the more different it is, the more interesting it will be to me because I already pretty much know what happens in this one. So no, like, and I got a chance to talk with the scriptwriter. She's awesome. And I told her that, like, whatever you feel like the story should be on the screen, go for it. Like that's the fun part about art is taking things in directions and seeing where they go. So she said that she thinks it works as it is. There's very few changes, but we'll see. And I'm not going to feel bad about that at all.
Oh, neat. That sounds like a great attitude. Let's see there. We had a question from Janaya Rose. I hope I'm saying her first name correctly, but let's see. You mentioned about Mark, the name Mark coming from somebody that you really knew in The Honest Truth, but how do you get the names for other characters in your books?
You know, character names are funny because it seems like no big deal. Who cares? Give them a name. But really, it does kind of matter. Like the good names kind of add to the flavor of the story. And if names are distracting or confusing, like think about like the Harry Potter books. I love the Harry Potter books. And like those names, Severus Snape, Albus Dumbledore, Hagrid, like those are great names. They really add to the story. And sometimes like sometimes you start writing and you just know, like Mark was going to be Mark. Coyote was always going to be Coyote. I don't know why. As soon as I got the idea, it came to me as Coyote. And sometimes no. Sometimes you really work on it. Sometimes you brainstorm. Sometimes you go through lots of names. Like her dad in this story, I went through 4 or 5 different versions of his name before I found one that felt right. Like well through the whole process, like we were almost time to print the book. And I was still like, is that the right name? So you want to find a name that feels right. And whatever that even means, I don't even know what that means, but you kind of know it when you find it, like, oh, that's the right name for that character. Sometimes it's from your life, like Mark was from Mark, but usually you're just kind of, what could a name be? And it sounds silly, but one thing that writers do is if you can, you want each of the main characters' names to start with a different first letter so they don't get too confused in your reader's mind. Like if you had a Melanie and a Melody and a Melissa, and like the reader could get confused as to who is who. So if you think of like Scar Island, I've got Jonathan, Colin, Sebastian, Walter. They all start with a different letter. So hopefully that just helps them be distinct on the page and not blurry people's minds. So that seems like a dumb little rule, but I mean, writers do it because it's kind of helpful.
Oh, that's neat. Let's see. What do you read for pleasure? So when you're not reading books, what do you like?
Totally. I read a lot, probably no big surprise. I read a couple of books a week, mostly middle grade books. So like the kind of books that I write, because that's what I do. And that's like the community that I'm in and my peers. And I've got other friends who are writers, so I read what they wrote. But not entirely. I read probably 80% middle grade books, 10% YA books, or like high school books, and then like 10% grown-up books, and all kinds. I don't have one genre that's my favorite, and it's okay if you do. If you love just sci-fi or just fantasy, that's fine. That makes it really easy when you walk into a library or a bookstore. No problem with that. But I tend to like, if it's got a story that I like and a character that I care about, I don't care if it's fantasy or sad or horror. I love all genres if it's a good story that pulls me in.
Any YA book that you've read recently that really got you?
Let me think about that. I'm trying to
suggest anybody.
It's funny. Like I love books. Books are my life. Books are my world. Books are my job. And I have the worst book memory. Like I think I read them too fast. And so I always say, I read so many books. I read 100 books a year. And then someone says, what's a good one you've read recently? And my mind goes completely blank every time. I don't know why. Let me think about this. Well, right now, I'm rereading Harry Potter with my daughters. We're reading a chapter out loud. We just started number 4, Goblet of Fire, super exciting. So that's at the front of my mind, but that's not I'm reading a manuscript right now. So it's a book that hasn't come out yet for somebody else. You get like quotes on the back from an author saying, I love this book. And so they've asked me to do a quote for it. So I'm reading that one right now. Let me get back to you on that. It's amazing
okay.
how blank
how
my
about
mind.
nonfiction? Do you read any nonfiction regularly?
I should. Because it's great, and it's a genre I don't talk about very much because I read almost entirely fiction. I read probably one nonfiction grown-up book a year. But other than that, I really love novels. I love getting sucked into a world. I love the emotion and connecting with the character and learning something about yourself. I am amazed every time how you can read a made-up story about a made-up person written by another person and apply it to your life, and it can give you perspective and insight on your own life, and I think that's amazing. So I do love novels. But nonfiction is great. And a lot of people, that's what they want to read. That's what they want to read all the time. That's great. Absolutely go for it. Read whatever excites you.
Good. Julian Griffin wonders, what is it like to be famous? So you get to walk into a bookstore, see all these books with your names on them, or any library in the United States and find your books on the shelf. What's that like?
It's amazing, especially because it took me so long and I had so many failures. So yeah, anytime, like a couple of only happened once or twice where I've like been randomly like in public and seen a kid reading one of my books like at an airport, and that feels like ridiculously amazing. And to walk in like an airport, I do spend a lot of time in airports, or I did until March, in an airport bookstore and see my book there. So it feels like amazing, like that was my dream, and I pinch myself every time. It has not worn off at all. It still feels amazing. And it feels great to do it like an in-person school visit and just to meet, 1,000 people who kind of know who you are. It feels great. But I'm also I'm definitely an introvert. And so I think being author famous is the perfect famous for me, because I get to see my dream come true, but no one recognizes you. I never get recognized or anything, which is fantastic, because wouldn't that be annoying to not be able to walk around, except my little town. Everyone knows me in my little town because it's like 2,000 people. But it's amazing to see people reading my stuff. Not the fame part of it, but just because you care about these stories, it was your dream, you put your heart into them, and to see someone else actually enjoying it. Because writing's kind of weird. Like if I'm a musician, I'm up on stage, I can see my audience, I can see them cheering or whatever. Writing, you do it by yourself, and then your audience reads it by themselves. And so you think theoretically maybe someone out there is reading one of my books, but you don't know. And so it's amazing to actually meet someone or talk to someone who read your book and liked it. And it feels really, I feel really, really grateful.
Great. Let's see, we're coming up on the hour here. One last question about your writing process during the day. I'm sure that you have some sort of a life schedule, but how does writing fit in with your day? Do you carve out a time for that?
So I do the best I can, and it's a weird job because being an author is kind of two jobs. And I didn't realize that until I started doing it. The writing is probably less than half the job. And like being an author is the other half of the job. And that's like all the emails and, podcasts and websites and traveling and school visits and Zooms and all this kind of stuff. Maintaining your website, all that stuff, to be an author, like the job, and the writing is like a separate thing. So I do what I can, especially these days. So my wife's at work. I've got 3 kids who are all doing remote learning. And so I'm like the teacher during the day now. And so now I don't have any time during the day because I'm managing the 3 kids with theirs. And so this is a challenging time for all of us. No big complaints. We're really lucky. But yeah, normally I would try to, it depends on when I'm Skyping or Zooming or traveling. But also you can't be too precious about it. And if my writing has to happen on an airplane or in a hotel or an airport, then that's when my writing happens. If I have to stay up late and write or get up early and write, then that's when I try to do it. And so it's nice in that respect that I can work on a Saturday morning, I can work on a Sunday night, I can work on a Tuesday afternoon. I don't have to go into work. My work is always in my head. And so sometimes there's challenges like COVID school closures, and you kind of work around those and do the best you can.
All right, good. And last question is, whatever you're writing right now, what interests you most about your project? Is it the character, a plot twist, the premise?
For me, it's always amazing how stories change and grow. And you think, at least me, like I'm a make it up as I go person, I'm not an outliner. And for me, it's always amazing how this idea starts in my head, like this is what the story is going to be. This is what it's going to be about. And by the time I'm writing it and rewriting it, it can change dramatically, like not little stuff, like whole big changes. So the one I'm doing now, I'm basically doing a whole rewrite. I finished the whole thing. And then I realized, oh, you know what? Like, I love this core concept, the premise of this story, but I feel like from page 1, it went this way. And this premise should have gone this way. So I basically threw it all away, and I'm back on chapter 1, which is kind of a shame. And it was a couple of years work, but I'm so excited about it. It's a whole new feel. Like I without getting into the details, it is really like the same starting premise, like a girl on a bus, but then the whole story is different, but in a way that I was like, oh, this is so much better and richer and more fun. And sometimes characters change, sometimes endings change, beginnings change. And to see, like, it's like a plant growing, to have this little seed and you think it's going to be, I don't know, I'm going to torture the metaphor. You think it's going to be an oak tree and it becomes a grapevine. I don't know. And it's amazing to watch that happen sometimes, and to see a story take on its own life and kind of clear its throat and say, no, you think you're in charge, but actually we're going to be going this way. It's going to be much better. And it's fun to be swept up in it and just go along with where the story wants to go.
Oh, well, you've piqued my interest. So we'll be looking forward to that next book and know that it went in 2 different directions, and this was the direction that you chose.
Totally.
Good. Well, thank you so much again for being our summer reading author. The kids were very excited to read your books. They're very popular here. And for joining us today and explaining a little bit more about your process. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And stay in there, guys. I know these are crazy times and we're all getting a little frustrated with how things are going. But we'll get to the end of it. We'll all be back face to face someday, and you'll have a story for the rest of your lives. This COVID thing is going to be in the history books, and you are a part of history. So I had a great time chatting with you guys. I hope you enjoyed one of my books if you read them, and I hope you enjoy other ones. And so, yeah, keep at it.
All right. Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. I don't know how it ends.